Welcome to Georgetown University. I'm John Borelli, Special Assistant to President John J. DeGioia, who cannot be with us this morning, but asked me to convey a warm welcome to Ambassador Rashad Hussain and to our other guests, especially Dr. Elise Anderson and Dr. Chris Seipel, who we've welcomed many times to our campus before. I want to thank, on behalf of Dr. DeGioia, Professor Matthew Anderson, Professor Paul Heck, and Professor Ariel Gluklik, who is the chairman of the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, for putting this program together for us today, developing and organizing it, which is on a theme that is always timely for us at Georgetown University: international religious freedom, contemporary changes, challenges, and opportunities. Dr. Hussain is the sixth to serve as Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, beginning with Robert Seipel, Professor Seipel, Dr. Seipel's father, in 1999. And Dr. Hussain is the first Muslim to do so. Congratulations. And you were confirmed by an 85-5 vote, bipartisan vote of the United States Senate. Congratulations for that, too. You have had a distinguished career serving Republicans and Democrats in various positions in the White House and in the Justice Department, being sent on ambassadorial missions to Muslim countries, and as a special envoy to international Islamic organizations, particularly the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I knew the OIC when it was the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the first Islamic organization of its kind to thank in a public way a Pope, John Paul II, and that was for his moral leadership during the crisis and then the First Gulf War back in 1990-91. When I read Dr. Hamid Al-Gabid's words of praise of Pope John Paul II for his, quote, repeated appeals for peace in the Gulf region, a peace founded on rights, justice, and fairness, I knew I was reading a new narrative, the opening of a fresh chapter in Christian-Muslim relations, without the stereotypes and negative judgments of too many old and inadequate narratives. Now, with an American Muslim as Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, we are hearing a new narrative with Dr. Hussain watching out for our interests for religious minorities across the globe. That is refreshing. It is refreshing, like the aspirations of this Department of Theology and Religious Studies for its program in religion, politics, and the common good, which brings us together today to hear Dr. Hussain's reflections. I will now turn the program over to Dr. Matthew Anderson, a lecturer in that department, which granted him a doctorate in 2018. He and Professor Heck have developed the undergraduate program for religion, politics, and the common good. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you for that interesting historical vision of developments, important developments in Christian-Muslim relations in the past century. I'd like to join John in welcoming Ambassador Hussain and his team to Georgetown, and also want to welcome all of you who are here today, including many friends and colleagues from across the university and the city. Thank you for being here. Thank you for braving, in some cases, DC traffic, COVID protocols, and any number of other things that stand in our way from gathering here this morning. We're grateful that you're here. As John said, my name is Matthew Anderson, and I'm a lecturer in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies here at Georgetown. Before I formally introduce Ambassador Hussain and invite him to the podium, I think it would be appropriate to say a quick word of thanks to at least some of the people who have made today possible. To begin with, I'd like to thank Carter Allen and the staff in Ambassador Hussein's office who have worked so hard to make today happen. Here at Georgetown, special thanks are due to Dr. John Borelli, Special Advisor in the President's Office, for his significant efforts in support of this event. Thank you, John. I'd also like to gratefully acknowledge the generous support of the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs here at Georgetown. It's always an honor to be working with the Berkeley Center. In the Department of Theology and Religious Studies, I would like to thank the chair of our department, Professor Ariel Glucklich, for his strong support. Administratively, this event would not have been possible without the significant efforts of Jamie Meyer and Margit Silva in our department. I'd also like to thank our two panelists, Dr. Chris Seipel and Dr. Elise Anderson. I'll have more to say about our panelists in a little while when we convene the panel, but we're so glad you could join us today. In important respects, the most immediate catalyst or context for today's event is a new undergraduate program, as John was outlining, in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies that we've named Religion, Politics, and the Common Good. Led by Professor Paul Heck, who's here today and who has been intimately involved in the preparations for this event, the program is designed to be multidisciplinary and to encourage students to explore the multiple intersections of religion and politics from a variety of perspectives and methods. But within this program, after deliberation, we determined that a class on religious liberty needed to be a core course offered by our department. That is, of all the important courses we might have prioritized, we felt there was something foundational about the history, the philosophy, even the controversies and complexities that surround religious liberty, which students need to wrestle with. So we offered the course for the first time this semester, and we'll offer it again next year. We believe our program, this undergraduate program, is just one more reason that Georgetown will continue to be one of the leading institutions in the country for the study of religion, politics, and public life. So that's perhaps the most immediate context for our event. But I believe there's also a broader context for this morning that deserves our attention. It's interesting that today falls during Easter week for Western Christians. Next week is Holy Week for Eastern Christians. Today we're coming up on almost the midpoint of the month of Ramadan for Muslims. And on Friday, Jews around the world will begin to celebrate the Passover. And perhaps because of all this, it might be a little easier for us today to feel the significance of religion and to acknowledge, even if for just a moment, the profound ways that religion shapes our lives, our history, and our respective cultures, and to acknowledge the profound ways that religion will undoubtedly shape our future. And perhaps for these reasons, these same reasons, it becomes a little more natural on a day like today to appreciate the significance of religious freedom. Both because of the vital importance of religious freedom and because of the complexities that surround this ideal and its international promotion, we are very fortunate to have with us today the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Rashad Hussain. Nominated by President Biden, Ambassador Hussain was confirmed in the U.S. Senate by a vote of 85-5 on December 16, 2021. At a time when growing political polarization seems to pose an almost existential threat to our country, I think the overwhelming bipartisan Senate vote in support of Ambassador Hussain is an indication of the confidence that so many people have in him as a leader in this field for a time such as this. Before his present role, Ambassador Hussain served on the National Security Council on Capitol Hill in the Justice Department and as the special envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation during the Obama administration. Before his entrance into public life, Ambassador Hussain finished his undergraduate studies at the University of North Carolina, completed a Juris Doctorate at Yale Law School and a master's in public administration at the Harvard Kennedy School. Ambassador Hussain, we are grateful for your work on behalf of international religious freedom. We are grateful for your distinguished service on behalf of the United States, and we are grateful that you've taken the time to speak with us today. We look forward to what you have to share with us. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Hussain to the podium.
Well, great to be with you all and to see you in this beautiful facility. Thank you, Dr. Borelli and Professor Anderson. It's great to be back here at Georgetown. Some of you may know that I've had the chance to teach here as an adjunct in the School of Foreign Service and in the Law Center as well. And I have to say it's some of the most rewarding work that I've done during my time in government, because not only do we have the opportunity to share some of our experiences working in government with some of the brilliant students here, but I also get to hear all of their tremendous ideas, and it has really been a great value add hearing some of the sometimes outside of the box thinking and bring it back into the work that we're doing in government. So I'm greatly appreciative for all of that. I was here last giving a similar talk back in 2010 at the Berkeley Center. I was President Obama's special envoy to the OIC at the time, and there was a Berkeley Center event with Tom Farr and others. And in that event, we touched on religious freedom issues around the world, as well as it was a part of the work that we were doing more broadly with Muslim majority countries around the world, but speaking specifically about the foreign policy and national security implications, which continue to be profound today in terms of the efforts to protect international religious freedom. The work of protecting international religious freedom has been deeply important to me throughout my career. It's important to me as an American who's enjoyed this right. It's been important to me as an attorney who has long cherished our First Amendment and in the principle protecting our freedom of religion. And it's important to me as someone that's been working in foreign policy and national security, as the data shows time and time again that countries and societies that protect religious freedom tend to be more stable and tend to be more peaceful, and those that don't tend to be less stable and less peaceful. So it's been an important part of our work. It continues to be a significant priority for the President, for the Secretary of State, and of course for our office. And we're grateful for all of your partnership on our efforts over the years. When I came into the first diplomatic role that I served in as special envoy to the OIC, a couple of the issues that were first brought to my attention really centered around religious freedom. I remember the first international multilateral forum issue that I handled was on a resolution that was brought forward every year by OIC countries on what they called the defamation of religions. And the idea ostensibly was to protect, I say protect in quotes, because as we all know, the great faith traditions of the world often don't need such protection. But the idea was to protect against what was deemed insults or defamation to these religious traditions. And so the OIC had put forward this resolution every year that had passed repeatedly. And the concern as policymakers that we have with this resolution is that it oftentimes gave support or sanction to blasphemy laws around the world. And blasphemy laws which were used to target religious minorities, blasphemy laws which were used to target political opponents in a number of countries around the world. So one of the first things that we did in that position was to work with a number of these OIC countries around the world, and really one by one. I remember at the Human Rights Council meeting with the individual ambassadors, meeting with foreign ministers around the world to make the point that these types of measures that support blasphemy laws oftentimes actually have the opposite impact that they intend. Oftentimes what they do is they increase the dissemination of the speech that they're trying to block. There's been historically, for example, efforts to issue religious edicts or rulings against certain types of speech which has been deemed defamatory, and the only thing that those edicts have done is actually raise the profile of that speech. And not to mention the human rights implications of those laws being used to target religious minorities, those laws being used in personal conflicts in some places around the world. So what we wanted to do in addressing what was ostensibly the underlying motivation for those types of laws, which was to end intolerance and discrimination, was to come up with an alternate regime, and that was known at the Human Rights Council when it was passed, Resolution 1618, which was an attempt and it continues to be work that's done around the world to address underlying causes of intolerance and discrimination and bigotry rather than to criminalize speech. And of course, I mentioned, my background as an attorney and someone that's very protective of the First Amendment. We want to have an approach as policymakers that attempts to address the underlying causes of intolerance and discrimination without criminalizing speech and taking some of the measures that can be used to target religious minorities and to undermine religious freedom. So that was an important part of the work that we did, and we continue to work on that today in our opposition to blasphemy laws around the world and our opposition to apostasy laws around the world. Another issue that was brimming and brought to my attention when I took on a diplomatic role in 2010 was there was controversy around a pastor who had threatened to burn the Quran, Pastor Terry Jones, and there was another controversy around a proposed Islamic center near Ground Zero. Around that time, there was a number of interfaith groups that came together. There was a coalition founded called Shoulder to Shoulder, and they came together and they said, as faith communities in the United States, we condemn these types of actions, the proposal to burn the Quran, for example. And so we started working very closely with interfaith communities, and through that work, one of the important points that was made to me is that while we're very honored to work with you and to work with Muslim communities in the United States to protect against this type of intolerance, there are a number of issues that we're seeing around the world, including in Muslim-majority countries, regarding the treatment of Christians, regarding the treatment of Jewish people and other groups that we'd like to work with you on. And so I really found that to be important and took it to heart. And throughout my travels in Muslim-majority countries, really looked to advance efforts and initiatives that would protect religious minorities in those countries as well. And through a series of meetings with civil society leaders, including religious leaders, we began a process that led ultimately to what is known as the Marrakesh Declaration, which is a declaration which protects or seeks to come up with an implementation plan to protect religious minorities living in Muslim-majority countries. So throughout my career, this has been work that's been critically important, and unfortunately, as we've moved forward, we're just seeing more and more pressing issues around the world that require our attention. So going forward, in addition to continuing to work on the set of issues that I've discussed, blasphemy, apostasy laws, the protection of religious minorities in Muslim-majority countries, we have a lot of work to do to address genocides that are occurring in the world. The genocide of the Uyghurs. A couple of weeks ago, Secretary Blinken also determined that the Burmese military's treatment and atrocities against the Rohingya account as genocide as well. And he made that determination, and shortly we'll be traveling there in order to follow up on the genocide determination and to continue to do whatever we can to protect the Rohingya and to also hold those that are responsible accountable for their actions. And as we move forward, we of course move forward with the conviction that religious freedom is a fundamental part of who we are as Americans, and it has significant foreign policy and national security implications. Religious freedom, of course, also includes the freedom of thought, conscience, in addition to the freedom of religion, which includes the freedom to change beliefs as well, to have no beliefs at all, and to practice these beliefs in public and to practice them in private, alone or in community with others, and to manifest belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. And we also can look to American history to tell us more about our country's deeply rooted ties to religious freedom. Simply put, religious freedom is fundamental to our country and has always been at the core of American life and our public policy, which is why I'm so pleased to hear about the new program here regarding religion and politics. It's tremendously important. It's a wonderful time to be doing it. And while what I've been speaking about and much of the work that we're doing as an office revolves around religious freedom, I think there's a much broader set of issues implicating religion and religious actors, and so much value that can be added through the work that you're doing and through what you're studying in order to advance United States interests around the world and in order to advance the interests of humanity. When we talk about the importance of engaging religious leaders and civil society actors, religious freedom, of course, is one important aspect of that. But we're all sitting in a room where people are wearing masks, and we're still coming out of a global pandemic, and the work of religious leaders has been tremendously important. There's a group, and I see some representatives here, Jim Moss and others, that have been working on an initiative called Face for Vaccines. So the work that's being done by religious leaders around the world to address vaccine hesitancy has been critical. The work that's being done to engage religious leaders around the world to address violent extremism has been critical, to build peace, to advance our humanitarian efforts, to advance development efforts. There's such a broad range of work that must be done in addition to the religious freedom work that is at our focus today. But in terms of the religious freedom work, as you all know, it is one of the first freedoms that's been enumerated in our Bill of Rights, which is a reflection, of course, of our founders' belief that freedom of religion or belief is at the cornerstone of liberty. And it's an important point to make generally, but in the context of the new core requirement that's a part of your curriculum as well, it's a critical set of issues both domestically and, of course, internationally, which is the focus of the work of our office. Our founders understood that no government was likely to protect other core rights if it didn't honor the sanctity of human conscience, the inherent and inviolable right of every person to pursue the ultimate truth and to believe or not believe as part of that pursuit. So for this reason, we consider religious freedom to be interrelated, interdependent, and closely related to other fundamental human rights, including freedom of expression, including freedom of peaceful assembly, and oftentimes freedom of association as well. So much so that when one of these rights is imperiled, we often find that one or more of these other human rights is also threatened as well. So when we talk about religious freedom, we're talking about that right, but it's so closely related to so many other fundamental rights, and it's important part of understanding the importance of protecting religious freedom for people in the United States and around the world. So as part of this work, we have an Office of International Religious Freedom at the State Department. Congress created this office in 1998 when it passed the International Religious Freedom Act, and part of our job as an office is to monitor religious persecution and discrimination around the world. In doing so, we meet with foreign governments, we meet with civil society and faith-based groups, we meet with NGOs, and we integrate the issues of religious freedom into the mainstream of U.S. foreign policy. We work with our regional bureaus and other offices around the State Department and within the United States government to make sure that issues of religious freedom are considered as we advance our foreign policy objectives. And we also produce a report every year, an annual report on international religious freedom that outlines the state of religious freedom in countries around the world. Our plan is to release in the next month or so the 2021 report, which will offer a comprehensive view of the state of religious freedom in nearly 200 countries and territories around the world. And one of the things that this report will show is that every country and every region of the world is dynamic in its civil society and faith traditions, and it will show the extent to which governments and societies respect these rights and how the respect for these rights varies, and will identify very clearly where countries are falling short. As a part of this work, the President, Secretary Blinken, and I are united in our commitment to protecting and advancing religious freedom for all people and challenging those governments that infringe on their citizens' rights to do so. All people everywhere are entitled to religious freedom no matter where they live or what they believe or what they don't believe. And we stand in defense of religious freedom not only as an expression of our deepest values as Americans, but also, as I said, because it is, in fact, a vital national security priority. Repression that stifles religious freedom undermines political stability and economic development. And without religious freedom, people aren't able to make their fullest contribution to their country's success. Whenever governments try to deny the human right of religious freedom, it in fact ignites tension and breeds division and instability. The challenges that we face are considerable. More than 80% of the world lives in countries where there are restrictions on religious freedom, according to the Pew Research Center. And this is clearly more important than ever, and it's something that we're focused on every day in our office, the Office of International Religious Freedom. The president has been very clear, however, that the good news is that the United States is not acting alone in promoting respect for freedom of religion across the globe. When we join our many like-minded friends to defend it, we use every diplomatic tool at our disposal. Our efforts intensify the pressure on persecuting regimes and can produce real change. An example of these efforts is the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, which has been critical to these efforts. The United States now formally has worked with the alliance to have a 33-member group, 33-nation group, and we're expecting more to join this year. Members of the alliance have signed on to a declaration that everyone has freedom to believe or not to believe, to change faith, to meet alone for prayer or corporately for worship. In the last few months alone, the alliance has spoken out in condemnation of Russia's brutal and unjustified invasion of Ukraine, against repression of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide, or the risks that Christians and other religious minorities face in Afghanistan, and of other religious minorities at risk in several other countries. Strong diplomatic and political measures, sometimes under the radar, often follow these statements. In 2018 and 2019, the United States also hosted a ministerial to advance religious freedom. The event convened senior government leaders and civil society representatives from around the world to discuss ways to advocate for religious freedom for all people, while also promoting and protecting the related rights of freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly. And I see many of you that have participated. Dr. Chris Seipel, who we very much grateful for all of your partnership and support over the years, has been a critical partner as well in these efforts. We're pleased that other nations have followed this model and have built upon the successes of the Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom. And the United Kingdom will be hosting the fourth iteration of this event in July. The religious freedom aperture also includes emphasizing and elevating the role of civil society, including faith-based actors, to advocate for change across several different foreign policy equities, including vaccine hesitancy, as I mentioned, climate change, advancing the rights of women around the world. And these actors are on the front lines of their societies, working to promote real change every day. Governments also must work with civil society and hear from the people that civil society represents. This is a critical point as we talk about the alliance that I mentioned and some of our efforts in multilateral forums and our bilateral efforts with other governments. Civil society has been critical. Religious leaders oftentimes have more credibility than political leaders and government leaders. They're the ones that are closest to the people. They're the ones that are interacting with people on a day-to-day basis in localities around the world. And they're the ones that have oftentimes the most impact and direct ability to produce change on the whole range of issues that we've been discussing. Ministries of religious affairs, education, youth, and social services have important parts to play, but they must also engage with civil society. And in doing so, we believe that their efforts can decrease intolerance, decrease societal violence, decrease violent radicalization, recruitment, and also mobilization to terrorism. So I want to thank all of you for being partners in this critical work, for the research that you're doing, for the studies that you're undertaking, the work that you're doing, the work of civil society, the work of religious actors has been critical to advancing U.S. priorities in a number of areas, in addition to religious freedom that I've mentioned. And our office has been engaged in these areas, and we look forward to working with you and collaborating. So I want to thank every one of you for taking the time to join us today. It's critical to be cultivating the next generation of leaders. It feels like it wasn't too long ago that I was sitting in a room just like this one, thinking about how I might make an impact. I never really had a definitive path in mind that said, there's this position or, this diplomatic role. I always just had in my mind the sense of areas that I was passionate about and the sense that I just wanted to make an impact in whatever I did. And government, of course, is at top of mind for me, but I know that there's so many ways in which we can have that impact as public servants, and it's really encouraging to see all of you here today, to take interest in such an important set of issues, and to see that Georgetown is prioritizing it at such a high level, creating this new program, coming up with such an interesting core group of classes for your curriculum, and working to advance our interests in this area. So thank you very much. I appreciate everything that you're doing. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Hussein, for those enlightening remarks and for your kind words about our initiatives here. We're now going to transition into a time of a more dialogical time in which we have two esteemed panelists here that are joining myself and Ambassador Hussein. And I want to introduce the two of them. You have on your flyer here some information about them, but I'll just draw your attention to a couple of things. First, we're very glad to have Dr. Elise Anderson here, who currently serves as a Senior Program Officer for Research and Advocacy at the Uyghur Human Rights Project here in Washington, where she works on research documenting abuses of the human, civil, political, and economic and cultural rights of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims. Dr. Anderson earned dual PhD degrees in ethnomusicology and Central Eurasian Studies from Indiana University. She has spent many years, from what I understand, in Western China, mastering difficult languages and difficult instruments as well. So will bring a wealth of insight into what is really a significant human rights and humanitarian crisis unfolding in Western China. And so we're very glad to have you here today. Really what we wanted to do was to sort of have one kind of case study where we're looking at a particular situation, and we invited Dr. Anderson to do that for us. And then we also have Dr. Seipel here, who is a long veteran, not only an actual veteran, but also a veteran in this field of religion and global affairs. He's the principal advisor to the Templeton Religions Trust's Covenantal Pluralism Initiative, the president emeritus of the Institute for Global Engagement. He has worked in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, served as the co-chair of the U.S. Secretary of State's Religion and Foreign Policy Working Group. His PhD is from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. So we've kind of tasked our panelists with a couple of different things. We want to hear sort of some insights on the crisis in Western China, and also we want to hear some kind of general reflections from a person who's been in the field working so diligently on so many different aspects of religion, religious freedom, religion and public affairs, as Dr. Seipel has been, raising somewhat different questions to engage Ambassador Hussein with. On the off chance that there's a lull in the conversation, which I don't expect, I'll chime in with a question or two of my own. And after a few minutes of dialogue, we will open up the floor to some questions from all of you here today. So with that, I'll pass things over to Dr. Anderson and look forward to what we're going to hear.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, as well as for organizing this event, and I'm very glad to be here with my co-panelists, co-participants today. I did want to start by saying, which you already more or less heard, that I am here not as a specialist in or expert of religious freedom, right, as a topic of my systematic research, but instead as an expert on sort of Uyghur culture, politics, and the crisis that is unfolding in the Uyghur homeland today. So I've been asked to discuss with you just what might be very basic for some of you, but might not be so basic for others. Who are the Uyghurs? What is happening to them? And what is the evidence base for it? So I'll just jump right into that. So Uyghurs are a Turkic-speaking and Turkic ethnic group living primarily in what some people refer to as Northwest China, but then other people are going to refer to as the eastern part of Central Asia. And I say it that way to bring up that Uyghurs are essentially, in the way that I and many other people see it, a Central Asian people who are colonized. They live in a homeland that looks more to its west than it does to its east, and they live in a homeland whose very name is often contested. So most of us learn about Uyghurs through the name Xinjiang, right, which is what you probably see in newspapers and elsewhere, but many Uyghurs see as a colonial name imposed from the outside. It means new territory, new dominion, new frontier in Chinese. Uyghurs have referred to their lands, the lands where they live, by other names throughout history, and there are multiple ways people refer to that region today: East Turkestan, the Uyghur region, the Uyghur homeland, and so on. And I just bring that up as one interesting point for reflecting on kind of the nature of what is happening in this particular region. Uyghurs are primarily, though certainly not entirely, completely 100% across the board, Muslims who practice Sunni Islam, and certain elements of Sufi practice and belief have long been widespread in the region as well. So even as recently as my sense of time is a little off, not 5. As recently as about 10 years ago, shrine pilgrimage was still very common in the region, particularly in the southern parts that were very heavily populated by Uyghurs. And Uyghurs have historically been what they themselves say are a farming people. In the Uyghur language, they say diqqan khalq, like we're a farming people. So 80 to 90% of Uyghurs have engaged in small-scale farming for long periods of time. Although you also have robust business and intellectual and other communities among Uyghurs as well. So what is happening to this group of people? On sort of the top level, atrocity crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, really significant violations of every fundamental right you could possibly think of in the world. There is essentially an all-out campaign of repression that the Chinese Party state has been waging against Uyghurs. We often date this to 2017. In reality, a lot of the policies that we're seeing play out today have been in progress since 2014, at least. And this is all part of a much deeper and long-standing pattern of increased state oppression. And this has been going on for decades in some senses. So we've seen securitization on a scale that was just unbelievable, even if you, like myself, had been traveling to and living in this region in the past. Mass internment, mass incarceration, right, in a prison system, kind of separate from camps and other detention centers. Surveillance, which has included the buildup of a surveillance state with facial recognition cameras, checkpoints, and so forth, but also human surveillance. So that's in the form of cadres who are sent into Uyghur homes, essentially to spy. There have also been incentives for neighbors and family members to inform on one another. Family separation is another a big component of what we've seen happening. Adults who have been detained or put into forced labor settings are separated from their children, who in turn have been placed into boarding schools and orphanages. And sometimes even children with non-detained parents are ending up in settings like this, where they're essentially under state care 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I already mentioned forced labor, another huge component of what's happening, both within the Uyghur region and all throughout the People's Republic of China, as people have been transferred out of the region to elsewhere in labor schemes. We've seen forced sterilization and the prevention of births. The birth rate has dropped really significantly in Uyghur parts of this region, in some cases as much as 49 or 50% a drop in a course of just a couple of years, which is not natural and would not ever really naturally occur anywhere. And then there have been elements of cultural and religious destruction as well. The destruction and desecration of religious sites, of cemeteries, restrictions on language, restriction on expressions of sort of ethnic belonging and cultural belonging, and so forth. Fundamentally, in the way that I think about this issue, I don't think it's actually just or even primarily an issue of religious repression or religious freedom. That said, the International Religious Freedom sort of coalition and community has been, I think, a really strong ally from the very beginning, especially here in Washington. The campaign targets religion, and it severely curtails the rights of Uyghurs to practice religion, but it also targets ethnic identity as well. And it infringes on the rights of people to have children, to create families, to continue the family ties that they have now, and to allow for the intergenerational transmission of lifeways for already existing families. And I think ultimately, it appears aimed at eliminating Uyghur distinctiveness and integrating Uyghurs more fully into the Chinese state, which is something they have really resisted ever since 1949 and even earlier. The alternate sources of loyalty are kind of the problem here, of which religion is one. And I'm not trying to say this is not an issue of religious freedom at all. It's just so much more, it's so much wider and more encompassing than that. And this whole system is enabled and bolstered by, and then I think further perpetuates, a very deep-seated Islamophobia. And that partly goes back to the PRC's participation in the global war on terror in its early days. To me, for example, as somebody who lived in this region for a long time, I was already living back in the United States in 2017. On April 1st of that year, there was an announcement that a whole bunch of names were going to be illegal for Uyghur parents to give their children. Many of those are names that come from Islam, that come from, that shared tradition. And I knew how bad things had been for Uyghurs for a long time, but when I heard that news, I knew that something was seriously amiss. I could tell, okay, the situation for Uyghurs seems to be growing qualitatively worse, and that was really shocking to me. As I already said, we've seen the destruction and desecration of mosques and cemeteries and other sacred sites. Effectively, there are bans on beards, on styles of, what you might call Islamic dress. Prayer rugs, Qurans have been confiscated. Imams have become a target of the state. For decades, fasting, praying had been somewhat sensitive and highly restricted for some people. But essentially, this Islamophobia underpinning this system made everything Uyghurs might want to do into a sign of religious extremism, as the Chinese state called it. Right? So religion became a scapegoat in this case, and kind of the reason for or at least one reason for persecuting people on a scale that just used to be unimaginable. In my final minute or so, I'll just say a little bit about the evidence base. People want to know sometimes, maybe because they're skeptical, or maybe because they just don't know. How do you know all of this? There's actually a lot of evidence. So Chinese party state, in other words, government documents, have revealed a lot about this. There have been leaks, including the Xinjiang Papers, the Xinjiang Cables, the Qaraqosh List, a batch of police files from Urumqi, the capital of the region where Uyghurs live. We've also seen things in the statistical yearbooks that are published by the government every year, both for the Uyghur Autonomous Region and then for the PRC as a whole. Construction tenders for camp facilities, prison facilities, and so forth. Testimonies are another source of evidence. That includes testimonies by survivors of the internment camp system, also testimonies by family members who are living abroad, who've lost contact with relatives back home. Satellite imagery has revealed a lot to us. Reports in Chinese state media have revealed a lot to us as well, including about forced labor transfers. Of course, they don't call them forced labor transfers in those state media pieces, but labor transfers around the region and around the PRC and so forth. And then Chinese social media as well, right? There's actually a lot of evidence that, that gets out in videos, photos, and otherwise. And I'll wrap up by sharing with you there's a proverb, a saying in the Uyghur language that goes, "Kunni itek bilen yapqılı bulmaz," and that means it's impossible to cover the sun with a coat flap. You can't cover the sun with a coat flap. The truth always gets out. So I'll end my comments there and look forward to the discussion shortly.
Okay, so perhaps, Dr. Seipel, you would like to present a few ideas, and then we could come back and sort of, or how would you like to proceed? Would you like to talk for a few minutes about the Uyghur crisis, or what would be your preference, Ambassador?
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Okay, so, all right, so Dr. Seipel is going to provide some more sort of systematic reflections on questions around religious freedom, and then we'll come back to some of these questions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, good morning. My name's Chris, and thank you, Elise, for those comments. One of my many failed initiatives around the world was working in Xinjiang in 06 and 09, and the trend lines were all there. I should also say there's a lot of good Chinese who recognize those trend lines. We need to be careful about, not that Elise did this, but painting broadly. There are good folk who are proud patriots in these countries who do not like what their government's doing, and they do not have any kind of realistic option. Having written my dissertation on Uzbekistan, I'm very sensitive to this kind of reflection. And in Central Asia, it's the same kind of feeling, the colonization from Russia, as we are becoming more and more aware of, as we all get to know Ukraine and how they think about themselves vis-a-vis the majority culture of Russians, which is often the issue at play with persecution and harassment. There's always a power dynamic between the majority, the ethno-religious majority, and the non-majority. And thank you, Ambassador Rashad, for your comments. He had a lot of good stuff, as he always does. But for the younger folk in the crowd, I hope you heard his last thing. He didn't know what his title was. He didn't know what his job was going to be, but he had a passion. Hold on to that. And in this Abrahamic Holy Week, allow for the divine to work in your life. He will reveal where you should be going. Hold on to that. So I'm the old guy on the panel, and in part because my dad was the first ambassador for religious freedom, and I've had the privilege and blessing of working with every ambassador since him. There's 6 of them, as was noted. And the organizers wanted me to take a step back and say, what are the questions? And these questions theoretically are for Rashad, but they're for all of us because we've got a lot of challenges, but there's also opportunity. So here are the 3 questions, and I'll dwell briefly on each of them, and then we can cede the floor back to Moderator Matthew and go from there. But the 3 questions are this: what impact, what framework, what goals? The good news about 2022 is that we've never been more organized as an international religious freedom movement. Rashad referenced several of the governmental coordinating mechanisms. There is an IRF, International Religious Freedom Roundtable. There's now an IRF Secretariat. There's an IRF Summit. Those are all civil society things. The ministerials are continuing. But not to be too harsh, but to be intentionally provocative, we've never been more organized and we've never seen more persecution. So what has to change? That's a fair question. Is it our mindset? Can we just dump it all on rising authoritarianism? Are we a part of the problem in how we think about things? Second question is, what framework? Some years ago, I took to using 2 archetypes to describe those who work in the religious freedom movement, and they're not defined against each other, although sometimes certain personalities will do this. But when you do religious freedom, there are advocates and there are builders. Now, an advocate is generally somebody who works outside in, usually oriented around the single issue of religious freedom. Usually not in relationship with the government that they're criticizing, but a strong passion to shout it from the mountaintops. And that's great. We need advocates. At the other end of the spectrum is the builder, who is in some ways the opposite of that. They're working inside out. They're placing religious freedom in the context of government and civil society folks, leaders in the country. They recognize that religious freedom is number 15 on the top 10 list of any government official in most of these places, in part because it's not anywhere close to their self-interest to work on it. And usually there are relationships at hand between the builder and the folks inside the country. And if you extend this analogy a little bit further, I think there have been 4, maybe 5 eras of religious freedom, all of which exist simultaneously. There's traditional advocacy, which starts in the modern era of religious freedom, 1998. We'll just say that because that's when it passed the Senate. And that is ongoing. Then there is the builders' eras of religious freedom and security. Builders try to harness self-interest, religious freedom and security. My old organization, the Institute for Global Engagement, I'd like to think pioneered some of that stuff. But then there's religious freedom and economic development. Brian Grimm has been at the forefront of developing that. And then the third era, these are all kind of keep going, is religious freedom and religious literacy, which is sort of a broader, different way of thinking about it because it helps engagement. But to engage, you have to respect the essence of somebody else's identity. Otherwise, it's instrumentalization. And you're a part of the equation. And when you interact, you and the other party, in the attempt to collaborate on something in common, a new dynamic results. And maybe the fifth element that we're seeing, particularly in this Ukrainian crisis, which I'm fascinated by, is the, for lack of a better phrase, the application of Magnitsky to everybody relevant. That we can now target even the children of senior Russian leaders and say, this is going to cost you. And I think that's very important going forward as we think about stepping away from broad brush and going very particular on specific provinces in particular countries and very specific leaders. The last question was, or is, what goals do we have? And maybe we should have started with this, but I think it's important to name where we've been over the last 24 years. When my dad took the office, he had 3 goals: promote religious freedom, promote reconciliation, a word you don't hear often in government, and work to ensure that the two are integrated into U.S. foreign policy, as Ambassador Hussein said. Those are pretty big goals. Those are meta goals. And I think we need those kinds of goals. You can disagree with the particulars, but we need big goals to aspire to and strive toward. Now, did my dad achieve any of that? I'm his son, but I'm also an academic. You got to be intellectually honest. No, is the answer. What were his achievements starting out there as we think about the process across 24 years? Well, he's the first. You can only go up, so he helped establish the office, which is great. A great story he tells about coming into the office, a dingy office on the 4th floor. It was just him and the vacuum cleaner and no staff. We've come a long way, which is good. And I would say, and maybe this is with some pride, is that he established the pattern and the product of the annual report, which is very important. That has become the reference point for much of these global surveys and gauging whether someone deserves sanctions or not. And the third thing that he did, I would say, is he got China on the CPC list, which nobody thought was possible at the time because he was working with Natalie. And let me conclude by saying a comment about Natalie because, as you know, she passed away on March 23rd. She's a beloved professor here at Georgetown. Her funeral and eulogy will be April 27th at the National Cathedral. But one of, I think, Dad's greatest effects is that he catalyzed conversations with people like Madeline about religion and international affairs. And soon after she left the Secretariat, or whatever the word is, she wrote a book in '06 called The Mighty and the Almighty. Now, here's something that may or may not be provocative, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that as a Democrat and as a woman and as a political scientist, she gave permission for those left of center to embrace religion and religious freedom as a real analytic factor that must be accounted for. To put it differently, she said the right of center doesn't get to own this anymore. And that's good for America, because we have to have some kind of radical middle between the leftover left and the self-righteous right that says this is not just bipartisan but nonpartisan about who we are and how we live with our deepest differences and our exceptional capacity to self-critique and self-correct. That is our history. That is our hope amidst these toxic times. So I'll stop there and give the floor back to Matthew.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chris, for just that vision of where international religious freedom has come from, some of the insights and tools that you've given to all of us here today. Very helpful. And thank you, Elise, for sort of focusing us on a particular unfolding humanitarian crisis. I think both of you have done just what we'd hoped you would do as far as giving us that kind of particular and also this general principles and visions. Now, what I think I'll do is, because our time is somewhat short, I'll just simply say, Elise, maybe there's a question, a line of inquiry you'd like to pose to the ambassador. I mean, I certainly can do it, but I think you could do it better than I could, on your area of expertise. And then we'll do the same with Chris, and here the ambassador will help us solve all these problems, hopefully. So.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. I'm excited to walk away from here with a solution. So now I have to choose which of the questions I prepared that I want to ask. I'll do this one. I think this might be interesting to people to hear. So one question that many observers ask when they hear about the kind of role of Islam as perhaps a scapegoat or a justification for what's happening to Uyghurs in this crisis, one thing they ask is, where is the Muslim world in all of this? I think the issue is not one just for the Muslim world to address and to solve, of course, but the response, and in some cases lack of response, has been really alarming. So there are some civil society or grassroots level movements in support of Uyghur rights in places like Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, and other countries as well, but the governments of Muslim majority countries, of Arab states, have been really deeply disappointing. Some of them have been silent. Others of them have expressed outright support. Others are participating in detaining and even rendering Uyghurs back to China. You might have heard the news about Saudi Arabia in just the past couple of days. So I would be interested in hearing you reflect. Where is the OIC in all of this? What sorts of options would the OIC might have? Why do you think this is happening? Yeah. And how could we build some sort of coalitional movement? Or how could the Muslim world, build some sort of coalitional movement in support of Uyghur rights? They're tiny questions.
Yeah, no, it's an important question and something that I talked about, even in my confirmation hearings. In 2012, I visited Western China, and the trend lines, as we talked about, were present even at that time. And I went there as the special envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And there at that time was a significant attention, I think, in Muslim majority countries. There was more willingness in those countries to speak out. The Secretary General at that time was a Turkish person, respected leader, diplomat, Ekmeldin Esenoglu. He had actually visited himself as well and had spoken, and we've seen others, leaders at that time. We had a number of statements that they issued, and even in the years following that. I think what we've seen since then is a lot of pressure from the Chinese on those countries, a lot of tools that they've used in terms of economic levers and incentives to push on those countries to get them to prevent them essentially from speaking out more on these issues. And in terms of what we need to do better, I think, to address some of those concerns is we need to be directly engaged as a government, as we've been doing, but we need to increase that engagement with our with Muslim majority countries, and not only deal with the countries on a bilateral level, but also be engaged at a public diplomacy level too. I think that there are populations around the world that would be shocked and outraged if they had the right information about what's happening. I think one of the things that China has done is they've spread a lot of misinformation, disinformation about the situation there. They've brought in delegations, for example, from a number of these countries and shown them what they want to show them, full expense paid trips, and then have spread online notifications, disinformation. I've talked to a number of people who've asked me questions about the situation in China, and they've said, I've read different articles and different information that I've gotten in social media, including in WhatsApp, about what's happening in China, and is it really as bad as they're portraying it, or is this some type of an American agenda to hit the Chinese and to pressure the Chinese? And as you said, nothing can be further from the truth. There is so much concrete evidence in terms of testimonials, in terms of what the Chinese themselves have released, in terms of what's been leaked, in terms of satellite imagery, in terms of data about the camps, the internment camps that exist. And so we have to do a better job of making sure that that information reaches the people directly. I think we have to do a better job also of showing up in some of these forums in powerful ways and high-level ways to ensure that in meetings of the foreign ministers of these countries, of the OIC countries, that the United States is watching and is interested in the types of statements that you talked about that are sometimes counterproductive, and we have to do everything that we can to be an effective counterweight to the misinformation and disinformation that the Chinese are putting out there. We've taken a number of steps, through our government to address what's happening there in terms of sanctions that we've put in place, visa restrictions that we've put in place. The Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act was something that we supported, that was signed into law. And of course, we have been, increasingly speaking with our friends in a number of OIC countries, but that's something that that we'll continue to build on and work on in the alliance that I mentioned earlier in the remarks as well.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Okay, follow-up question
Yeah.
is just, are we ever, and this might be more difficult to answer, and thank you for the very thorough answer, by the way, but are we ever going to be able to get away from the idea of like American grand plots, right, against the world, and also, I mean, frankly, the problems, that the United States has kind of in the Muslim world with its image based on, the global war on terror and so forth. Like, how do we, I think those feelings, those beliefs, those interpretations of the U.S. are never going to go away, right, in that engagement we have with the Muslim world. So how do we address that?
Especially in a time when it's so simple to disseminate false information. Yeah. In social media and other platforms. So that is a reality that we're going to have to live with, but we have to just be better. We have to be better in getting our message out. We have to be better in terms of our policy. One of the things that we see, and I've been involved in a number of public diplomacy efforts, is that you can engage on both sides in efforts to discredit countries. You can be engaged in efforts to promote your image and to promote a set of messages that you'd like to spread around the world. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what trumps everything is policy. And so getting the policies right and making sure that there's significant amplification of what your policy actually is, I think at the end of the day, can really pierce through a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that's out there. And we have to make sure that that's what our focus is going forward.
Thank you.
Chris, please.
My question's pretty simple. What does success look like for you at the end of your tenure, either 2 years from now or 6 years from now, or whatever the math is, depending on the elections. But I mean, the American thing would be, what are the 3 things you think that you could affect? But in reality, what's the one thing that you'd like to see maybe different? And how do you anticipate future efforts represented in the room?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would like to express my appreciation about the work that has been done by my predecessors, including your father. And oftentimes in Washington, we ask these questions and we want people to point towards, what's 1, 2, 3, and what are the metrics. But at the end of the day, ending human suffering, alleviating human suffering is the central goal. And that can be accomplished by helping even one person. Every additional life that you improve, to me, is an important metric. And part of what we do on a day-to-day basis, in addition to the broader efforts that we do of engaging in diplomatic efforts with countries and engaging with multilateral efforts and looking at some of these resolutions, which on their surface oftentimes seem very theoretical, is that we raise individual cases of people that are being persecuted with ambassadors here, with foreign ministers and those that we meet with at the highest levels. And so we've seen the direct benefit of that in a number of cases. And so part of what we want to do is just is a very simple but important effort of raising the cases of those individuals that are persecuted around the world. A big part of the effort that we want to continue to be focused on going forward is something I touched on in the remarks that we began to work on during my previous time in government, which is to improve the situation of religious minorities in Muslim-majority countries. So to really build out, kind of working with civil society, an implementation plan for how we're going to go forward with initiatives such as the Marrakesh Declaration. And that really means taking efforts to work with governments and civil society to have some of the principles that we talk about in those declarations implemented as law, implemented even as part of the emerging constitutions in some of the countries that we're dealing with, and to see some of those really become concrete realities as efforts to protect religious freedom. We've talked about the situation of the Uyghurs and also the Rohingya, but to move forward in addressing the genocides that are occurring around the world, not just in terms of the accountability, but to put in place measures that can help prevent further atrocities in those parts of the world and prevent such atrocities occurring in other parts of the world as well. When we see these trend lines that you talked about, to have an apparatus in place that can act on those trend lines and not just observe the trend lines, but to make sure that we're learning from past experiences to prevent some of those atrocities from occurring again. Another area that's been really important to me that we've worked on over the years is addressing the rise in anti-Semitism. And what we've seen, we've talked about anti-Islamic sentiment, Islamophobia. One of the trends that we see is that there's often a link between the two. And individuals and societies in which we see an increase in anti-Semitism, we see a rise in both anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim sentiment. And so that's going to continue to be a focus of our work in addressing the challenges that we face in that regard, working not just with governments, but also with civil society as well.
If you'd like, sure. Okay, thank you so much. I know we could continue this conversation, and I'd like to. I also think, though, that we should hear from some people in attendance today. So what I think we could do, I think we have a couple of microphones here, and if it's okay with the panel, we'll open up the floor. Perhaps one of the ways we might do it is to ask if you could direct your question to the ambassador, and then if our panelists, Chris and Elise, have something to add or comment to make, in addition, we would love for them to do so. Would that be possible? So who wants to start us off? Here I think we have one. Yeah, please.
I actually got into a debate discussion a while back over an issue, and it specifically was referencing the Muslim world. And I don't remember the exact situation, but there was an election, and there was the possibility that a parliament was going to pass some sort of blasphemy law. And it ran up against the debate between, to what degree do you give legitimacy to bad laws if they're going through a good process? And, what is the relationship between, blasphemy laws on one hand and democracy on the other hand? Because on one hand, the U.S. wants to promote some version of democracy, but if a democracy is going to lead to something that would deny minority rights, that's certainly not any kind of democracy that I would recognize. So when you're dealing with these issues in the Muslim world, I just wonder how you think about that tension.
Yeah. Well, I mean, democracy is a comprehensive system, right? It's not just a system in which the majority gets to decide. That is certainly a part of democracy in which the majority, elects representatives that come up with laws through a legislative process. But there's also the broader rule of law. There's law enforcement. There's judiciary. There's independent judiciary. So in situations where you have a law that's passed, and in some cases, a blasphemy law is passed because there are legislators that might sincerely believe that there are certain laws that need to be put on the books in order to protect individuals or faith traditions from insults, but they may not understand or have a broader kind of assessment of what the implications of passing those types of laws are. And so when you have a law like that that's in place, of course, our position as the United States would be to oppose and to work with countries and to work with civil society to raise awareness and education about how these laws are often used. But to the extent that you do have laws like that in place, we're in our discussions with countries that have such policies, we want to make sure that they're not being used or applied in ways which target religious minorities. We want to make sure that if those laws are being used, and for example, I've been in touch, just very recently in a number of, with officials from another countries where if an individual has been charged, we want to call out when there are charges that are made for political reasons that are targeting, religious minorities or targeting political opposition. We want to make sure that there's a judicial process in place to adequately address and adjudicate those types of cases when they do come forward. So, I appreciate your question, and the short answer is that in our democratic system, we have a number of mechanisms in place to kind of check the types of abuses that you're speaking about, and there's multiple entry points for us to address the abuses that may occur, not just at the stage where the law is being formed, but even in cases where we do see a law that we oppose, ensuring that it's not implemented in a way that's harmful.
Next question. Well, you can wait for the mic if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, I appreciate you being here. I had a question about the disinformation. It seems like it's very strong in China. The disinformation either subdues the culture or even makes the culture get behind the policy. And then bring that to the current crisis in Ukraine. I read a statistic that Russians were 81% behind Putin's actions, and then that has just increased to 83%, like behind that, I guess, from disinformation they give. I was wondering how you guys are thinking about how to combat that. It seems like that's such a powerful force, or people are behind, like, probably a lot of Chinese are hearing disinformation about the Uyghur population and saying, okay, I kind of agree with that. How are you guys combating that, I suppose? And is that even your jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit outside the scope of what our office works on, but I can just say generally that there are a number of efforts in place. We have a Global Engagement Center, which is focused on combating disinformation. As a government, of course, we work closely in partnership with a number of social media platforms They're the ones that have policies that are put in place to handle some of the types of disinformation that you're talking about. And of course, as as a democratic country which cherishes our First Amendment principles, it's not up to us as a government to tell social media companies what they should and should not be allowing on their platforms. But we do work closely with them as they kind of regulate what's there as well. It's important for us, of course, to continue to get out the right information and to send a clear message about what Russia is doing, and not only the United States, but to work closely with our allies and countries around the world to continue to get that message out. So it's a comprehensive set of tools that's being used to address a very real challenge, and one that does have some significant implications, as evidenced by the statistics that you mentioned.
Let's go here.
Two terms have been used today, religion and politics. Many of us are involved in trying to deal with those. The politicizing of religion is a huge problem, where politics shapes our religion instead of the other way around. The politicizing of religious freedom has also been a big issue. You all know that well. How do you see us dealing with that, the politicizing, and it can happen from the right or the left, of religion per se, and how you can support religion as the kind of independent force? I mean, King said it well. He wanted to remind the churches that the church should not be the master or servant of the state, but the conscience of the state. Yeah. So with that in mind, how can you in your new role help to prevent religious freedom from being politicized by all the forces that surround you?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think we've been very fortunate that on the international side of things, when we talk about the protection of international religious freedom, there's been tremendous bipartisan support. And I think it goes back to the first ambassador, my predecessors, immediate predecessors, Ambassador Brownback and Ambassador Saperstein. We've really made a strong effort to ensure that we keep the issues that we work on bipartisan. I think it really sends a powerful signal around the world that we've had bipartisan support since 1998 on a number of the issues that we've been working on. I think it sends a powerful signal that President Obama and President Biden have put in place. If you look at the last three ambassadors for international religious freedom, we have a Christian person, a Jewish person, and a Muslim person. I think we're sending a strong signal in the United States and around the world that we're united on the issues that we're working on. And if you look at the votes that that the Congress has taken in a highly politicized time on a number of international religious freedom issues, including the Uyghur issue that we've talked about today, there's been a tremendous amount of bipartisan support. And one of the things that I speak to my team about, and I speak with others in our government about, and I speak about when I go to the Hill, and hopefully this was helpful, in the confirmation process that I went through. That was, fortunately very bipartisan. Is that we have to make it a key priority to be clear around the world that the First Amendment is something that we cherish as Americans broadly, and that it's something that we want to protect in the United States, and a value that we want to stand up for all around the world. And I think that we've had a lot of success in doing so. The domestic side of it is a little bit outside the mandate and the scope of our office, and I know that that's something that you're handling in your new centers, and appreciate the work that you're doing there. But on the international side of things, we have managed to keep things bipartisan.
Chris, do you want to speak to this question of bipartisanship?
Or nonpartisan, I should say. We use both of these terms, and it really has been,
and maybe respond to some of these other questions too, because they're really great questions. But we have to know our own history. And for me, it's not just, quote, the founding fathers, but going back to Roger Williams. He fled the soft theocracy of Massachusetts and dared to pay the Indians for the land, learn their language before he would talk to them about the gospel, refused to let the king give away the lands, didn't stand for that. And then in the colonial charters, there's two. One's 1647, the other's 1663, ties religious freedom to security. The people will be more loyal to the state when they have the freedom to exercise in religious concernments. It only makes sense. So it's not only the right thing to do, but it's in your self-interest to do so. So I think that knowing the history and where we come from, and that this is the model, because all religions are everywhere, right? We're all minorities somewhere. So this is the logic that I go with every country that I always go to. There's no such thing as a nation state. My PhD is international relations, which I sometimes can't stand. But they always use the term nation state. Well, there's no state with just one nation. There are only states with many nations, many people groups, many confessions, many religions. And the question is, how does the state create a framework to live together? So as the ambassador has said, if you've noticed in his comments, formal and then in the Q&A, he's always talking about government and civil society. Top down and bottom up. How do you engage both of them simultaneously? And you don't define success as, okay, we got them to change the law. Well, law is important, but if you don't have a culture that owns it from the bottom up, then it doesn't matter. And it has to be or should be consistent with the majority faith group. Because everybody's got a golden rule, but the majority faith group has to buy into this as this is the best of who we already are. That's a different kind of logic than name, blame, and shame. My last comment is that means you have to get into the business of equipping. Last month I was in Kazakhstan and we had a 2-day certificate program for law enforcement. Law enforcement is where the rubber meets the road. What is their framework for thinking about how the law is implemented? You can change the laws, but if they don't get it, next month we're going to be in Uzbekistan doing the same kind of thing and talking about rule of law, relationships between faith leaders, and religious literacy, equipping citizens to figure out what is already consistent with their own culture and faith. To say to be Uzbek is to be Muslim, but it's also to be Jehovah's Witness, Scientologist, Christian, other than Russian Orthodox. These things take time, and you got to keep showing up and keep equipping and giving practical skills so that we can make manifest some of these great principles that are in the various declarations, starting with Marrakesh from 2016.
We'll take maybe one more question, if we could. I know time is short. We're running a couple minutes over time because we started a few minutes late. So we feel it's just. Who was here? Okay, please.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson gave a very powerful summary of the suffering of Uyghurs, which can be described nothing but as genocide. In their case, the oppressor is a state actor. Yazidis went through a similar story of suffering in terms of its nature at the hands of a non-state actor. And the way to respond to each requires a different configuration of skill sets and instruments and ways of executing things. So what would be your comment on this radical diversity of the possible oppressors in terms of our readiness and flexibility?
Yeah, in our work that we do in the Office of International Religious Freedom, we not only identify countries of particular concern, special watch list countries, but also entities that are engaged in persecution of religious minorities. And it's important that we have a comprehensive toolkit that can address all of these realities that we face. So in some situations, one of the tools that we have to use is the set of policies that we have to address terrorist propaganda, terrorist recruiting, which is something that I was involved in when I was working on countering ISIS and some of their propaganda and their recruiting around the world. Actually, one of the classes that I've taught here at Georgetown goes through the various tools that we have at our disposal to address terrorist recruiting, terrorist groups, and what they're doing to persecute people. The Yazidis are one example of that, but there's so many others. And really, there's a set of diplomatic tools, there's a set of military tools, there's a set of economic tools, there's communications, there's public diplomacy. So across the board, we have to make sure that we are using all of the tools in the smartest possible way at our disposal in addressing those entities that are also, such as terrorist organizations that are undermining the rights of religious minorities and others. And it goes back to something that Chris said, is that it's important to make sure that those organizations are discredited amongst those that they're trying to recruit. I mean, an organization like ISIS, they claim to be defenders of Muslims around the world, but if you look at their actions, what they've actually done is directly opposed to Islamic principles, directly opposed to the interests of Muslims and to Muslim communities around the world. So we have to make sure that we are getting that message out and really ensuring that there is buy-in from amongst those communities that they are trying to themselves recruit and trying to brainwash with the narrative that they're putting out and the disinformation that they're putting out.
Okay. I think we have to, in the event, I'm really sorry about that. I'm trying to observe the protocols that have been imposed on me. I would sit here all afternoon and talk with our panelists, but I think we should probably wrap up. Let's just say, Ambassador Hussain, thank you again so much for being here, for your leadership. I hope you know now that there are a lot of people here at Georgetown who are supporting you and rooting for you and praying for you, for your success. Thank you, Dr. Seipel, Dr. Anderson, for your work in these fields, both in Western China, the Uyghur crisis, and more broadly in Central Asia, and just for laboring in these areas. And we're honored to be here to hear from you. And thank all of you for coming and for showing your interest. We hope this has given you some food for thought as we enter into these religious holidays over the next few weeks. For the place of religion, the place of religious freedom, and those things that you might be able to do in response to the kinds of things that we've heard today. So thank you for coming, and we'll wrap up with that. Let's give our panelists a hand.